What happens when a country goes bankrupt as food prices soar, inflation reaches new highs, and the nation's resources dry out? Sri Lanka is in the midst of a growing financial and humanitarian calamity that might lead to the country's bankruptcy in 2022. High government expenditure, tax cuts that reduce state revenue, significant loan debts to China, record low foreign exchange reserves, the immediate effects of the COVID scandal, and a decline in tourism all contribute to the government's impending collapse. In order to pay off domestic and international debt, the government has been printing money, which has fueled inflation. The World Bank estimates that 5 million people have fallen into poverty since the pandemic began, which is equivalent to 5 years' worth of progress in eradicating poverty. Inflation hit a record high of 11.1% in November, making it difficult for previously wealthy people to feed their families, and making many basic necessities out of reach. After the president placed Sri Lanka in an economic emergency, the military was granted the authority to ensure that necessary goods, such as rice and sugar, were delivered at regulated government rates. However, this hasn't done much to lessen the suffering of the populace. Let's examine what would happen if Sri Lanka or any other government filed for bankruptcy. In theory and in a perfect world, governments would receive money through taxes and investments to cover their debts. However, governments frequently borrow money and spend beyond their means, just like people do. Governments do this by issuing bonds with a commitment to repay the bond's face value, plus interest at the maturity rate. National debt, often known as sovereign debt, is made up of both internal and foreign loans. Bonds issued by the government and sold to international investors are known as external obligations. Internal debts are obligations to citizens of the same nation. Fiscal and monetary policy can be used to finance internal debts by increasing taxes and printing more money. But external debts can take money away from other sources of income because they must be repaid in currencies that the government does not control. A nation can never declare bankruptcy. The statement, "the country is going bankrupt," is untrue. To start, when a nation doesn't pay its obligations back, it doesn't declare bankruptcy. Instead, it defaults on the loan. Second, the government defaults, not the nation. The majority of nations have defaulted on their debts or restructured them at some point during their histories, despite the impression that this is a rare event. Greece was the first nation to fail on its debt in 377 BC. Aside from its infamous default of $1.8 billion as the first developed nation to do so on an International Monetary Fund loan. Since gaining its independence in 1829, approximately half of Greece's history has been spent in financial default. Within 15 defaults between the 18th and 19th century, Spain, on the other hand, has had the most defaults. Prior to defaulting on their loans, IMF members frequently request a bailout from the organization because it not only has the financial means, but also the know-how to manage the program. The Washington Consensus outlines several of the conditions that must be met in order to receive bailout funds, such as austerity, currency devaluation, and trade liberalization. Why do defaults happen? Default occurs when a nation is unable or unwilling to pay its debts. The new administration frequently defaults on the debt it inherited from the old one when a country's ruling party changes. A country defaulting on its debt can happen for a number of reasons, such as an abrupt change in the flow of global funds or insufficient revenue. For instance, government expenditures and the collapse of Jamaica's most significant business, tourism, were to blame for the country's $7.9 billion loan default in 2010. What happens once a country defaults? In either a personal or business bankruptcy, the assets are taken back by the creditors. However, a country's assets cannot be seized by its creditors, and the government cannot be forced to make payments in the event of a default using funds it does not have. There is no guarantee that this holds true for the nation's assets that are situated abroad. Argentina's Navy training ship, which was located in Ghana at the time, was confiscated after it went into default in 2012. The creditor of the defaulting nation's only choice is to renegotiate the loan's terms. Government bonds will undergo a haircut or postponed payment, in which case their value will be decreased. Argentina committed to pay back a third of its debt after missing a payment on an $81 billion loan in 2011. In this sense, 93% of the debt was converted into performing securities between 2005 and 2010. And Argentina didn't give the Vulture Fund its money back for the remaining 75% of the debt until 2016. What effects does moving into default have? The immediate cost of defaulting is the loss of principal and capital to the creditor as a result of a partial debt cancellation or debt restructure. The government is more likely to forgive debts owed to foreign private creditors, since there is less chance of reprisal. Additionally, much like in any other crises, government defaults lead to skyrocketing inflation, unemployment, and political pressure on the defaulting government. Instability in the financial system leads to bank runs since domestic banks carry the majority of domestic debt. Bank runs happen when a sizable sum of money is removed from a bank due to public anxiety and lack of trust. The government is aiming to restrict the amount of money that each depositor can withdraw through capital restrictions, which are in place to prevent this. Greek banks were forced to close for nearly 20 days in June 2015, restrict bank transfers to foreign institutions, and cap cash withdrawals to €50 per day in order to prevent a banking crisis. A sovereign debt crisis may result in economic and currency crises as overall demand declines and the global market loses faith in the nation's currency. The inability of a defaulting nation to access the credit market is another predictable effect. If a loan is given to it, it will either have a high interest rate or none at all. The credit rating of the defaulting nation will drop, which will discourage international investment. There you go. Sounds interesting, right? Please let us know in the comments section below your thoughts on this topic. We appreciate you supporting this channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this to your friends. Thanks again. Have a good one!